This is the Trending Economic Issues segment where we bring you exclusive critical analysis of economic issues happening across the African continent based on countries and how sectors in those countries are performing to develop the growth prospect of these countries. This country, Cote d'Ivoire, has been in the limelight for quite some time now. They've been able to maintain astronomical growth. At the moment, the World Bank estimates in 2016 that the growth has been pegged at 8.5%, and this is a good news for the country. But the bad side of it has to do with the inclusivity of the growth. It appears half of the Cote d'Ivoirian, or Ivorian, I would say, be really in abject poverty. Why is the case? Why is that the case? And many more issues will be touching on across Africa right here on the Trending Economic Issues segment. If you're watching us anywhere, you can get access to the viewership online across the internet on www.businesstvafrica.com. My name is Winston Nii. To join me in this discuss a trending economic issue, I have my guest seated already. Isidor Kpotufe is a Director of Communication with IMANI Ghana and also an active and urgent development activist. And also to my immediate left is Gideon Amissah. He's the Head of Research with the Institute of Certified Economists, Ghana. Good morning, gentlemen, and welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Good morning, Winston.
How's the week been?
Not bad. It's been stressful, but very enjoyable.
On just a Tuesday, and the stress has already started. I wonder when it gets to Friday.
No, the weekend has been stressful, not the week.
All right, then. So let's go straight to business, and then let's take straight to Cote d'Ivoire's case. Cote d'Ivoire has gone through a moment of civil war and activities that most African countries didn't go through. But how fast they're growing, most people are really surprised. But with 8.5 growth prospect, do you think this growth, they are likely to sustain it? And also, if that's the case, what can they do as a country to make sure this growth is inclusive? Isidor.
Thank you very much, Winston, and good morning to your cherished viewers. It's been a while since I appeared on this platform. Yeah, like you said in your introductory remarks, Ivory Coast has been in the limelight for quite some time now because of its growth patterns. To me, that's not surprising. Before the political instability hits the country, Cote d'Ivoire has always been seen as a top performer on the economic front within the sub-region. So to say that Ivory Coast has a history of performing very well when it comes to economic growth. The challenge was the political instability that arose as a result of misunderstandings between the different actors or political parties. But after that, after the instability, there came stability. And so confidence in the economy began to rise. And other regional bodies that left the country during the instability period came back, including the African Development Bank. You understand that? So the African Development Bank is a very important actor within the economic space in Africa, and they contribute to economic infrastructure projects on the continent. As I speak to you, African Development Bank is investing heavily in many infrastructure projects. Indeed, the bank is a partner to Ivory Coast National Development Plan, the medium-term plan. Okay. And other partners are also on board. The point I'm trying to make is that the story of growth for Ivory Coast is not new. It's been there before. It's happened before. It's only that the crisis that we saw or we witnessed between 2000 and 2010 or 2011 forestalled growth. Now you asked if we could sustain this growth pattern. First of all, the question we need to be asking is, what are the drivers of the growth? What are the factors driving the growth? Then we can determine whether or not they are sustainable. If the factors are not sustainable, then we say that the growth cannot be sustainable. The other question that you also ask is the inability of the growth to cover all components of society. That is to say that growth is taking place, but it's not benefiting the large majority of people. Why is that the case? That will go again to the question of components of the growth or the factors of the growth. You understand? As we speak today, Ivory Coast is one of the largest export-driven economies. I understand the 77th in the world. You understand? How many economies do we have in the world? That's 181 economies, and Ivory Coast is 77th largest export economy. That tells you is that, what that tells you is that the country is investing so much into exports, you understand, and cocoa beans being, the largest. Don't forget that many companies many companies depend on cocoa beans to manufacture other food products and so on. So I want to believe that cocoa beans, driven by exports and other agricultural products, are the factors driving the economy. Now, the government has also seen the need to invest so much in infrastructure, in road and transport infrastructure, and oil and gas. These investments very recently have also helped to drive the economy very, very high, especially when there was high demand for oil and gas in recent years. But the good news about the oil and gas sector in Ivory Coast is that it's been diversified, and you could see that today Ivory Coast is supplying gas and oil to neighboring countries, including Ghana. You understand? Indeed, the Deputy Minister of Power, Honorable John Jinapor, said that producing power in Ghana would be unsustainable if we did not depend on Ivory Coast for supply. That tells you the importance of Ivory Coast within the supply chains, in the oil and gas sector, within the sub-region.
Interestingly, in your initial session, you made mention of partnership, and that has to do with the African Development Bank and most agencies, that is the private individuals who are intended in investing in countries, or let's say Ivory Coast current infrastructure development. How critical is partnership induced in terms of private partnership in led growth in the country?
I wouldn't say that the African Development Bank is a private partner in this case. African Development Bank is the African version of World Bank. You understand? So they are there to contribute to the growth process of African countries. But we also have to admit that their contribution to African growth is somehow limited if you compare that to, or if you compare their work to other actors like World Bank and the IMF. Indeed, the National Development Plan, the medium to long-term plan, is being funded by, these partners, the African Development Bank, the World Bank, and the IMF, and other private sector players. At some point, analysts were worried. I was particularly worried about the debt profile of Ivory Coast. But if you compare that to Ghana, it's relatively better. The debt profile of Ivory Coast is about 40%. You understand that, and that of Ghana is hovering around 60 to 70%. And so partnership is key, but private partnership is better. You understand? So government has the idea. You invite the private sector on board to fund and implement the idea. You understand? So that is the way to go. But I don't think that the partnership with the likes of African Development Bank, World Bank, and the rest are really the way to go. Okay. Indeed, I do acknowledge that it is important to have them on board because, they are part of the development process. They have to be on board. That I don't dispute. But I'm saying that the most sustainable, partnership that we can have is to bring the private sector on board. The truth of the matter is that Ivory Coast has seen the need to have a strong and vibrant private sector environment. So they have worked and they have invested in many reforms. And Ivory Coast is one of the topmost destinations for investment within the West African sub-region. And to a very large extent, the African sub-region, the African continent, sorry. So Ivory Coast has also seen the importance of a vibrant private sector. And many of the large infrastructure projects that have been undertaken in the most recent times have been actually funded partly by the private sector.
All right. Let me bring Gideon into the discussion. What's your take on the astronomical growth that Ivory Coast is experiencing at the moment?
Well, thank you very much, Winston, and good morning to your viewers. I think we have tried as human beings always to measure our performance and our output levels. And then one of the ways we have tried to do it is to use economics and statistics to assess our performance as a people on this planet. Economics helps us to use our GDP growth rate to assess how we are performing as a people. It is a good news for Ivory Coast for us to hear that they are growing at this rate. In fact, when you look at Africa, on average level, like East Africa has been performing so well, And then apart from East Africa, the second in terms of average growth is West Africa. So when you come to West Africa, the country that is leading in growth now currently is Ivory Coast. And that is a good news for them. Unfortunately, the other part of the issue is how the growth is not felt, by all the populace or the people living in the country. And that should signal us, or should give us a signal as an analyst, that then probably where is the growth coming from? Because we've seen countries, performing so astronomical at a certain point in time, and after that particular year, they begin to drop. A typical case is Ghana. After the discovery of oil, we were one of the best, growing economy in the world. And afterwards, we started experiencing declining trend of our real growth rate. That should give us an indication of where the growth is coming from. And that is a very, very important. And I think the story we are discussing actually points to some particular areas where the growth is coming from. And that is where I would want to base my argument on whether that growth is sustainable as far as Ivory Coast is concerned. And perhaps that is why, the living standard is not reflected by this growth rate. In the sense that if your growth is coming from infrastructure, well, we know what Ivory Coast has been through. I think Isidor made some point about it, so I wouldn't want to go there. But right afterwards, we see infrastructure, and we see the African Development Bank coming in terms of infrastructure. So the picture is being painted as this bank coming in is propelling the growth. And in that case, if you analyze the issue very well, you realize that, okay, then that possibly could be the reason. Because if they contracted engineers to work on some of these infrastructures, as I've always been saying, how much of it was local content based, in terms of the amount that was, given to the people who worked on the project. So this is a very crucial point. If you invest in infrastructure, and infrastructure in terms of calculation, there's the GDP is captured once. After it's been captured, that's all for that particular year. It will not be captured again because it has, been captured already. And in terms of the money that is coming, how much stayed in the country, that is also crucial. Otherwise, after this particular performance, if you are not careful, we begin to see the real growth of the economy. In this case, that is why you are seeing, and I'm trying to link it to why you are seeing the gap between the haves and the have-nots. Because what is driving the growth is actually not something that we can tangibly rely on.
How do we then bridge that gap, the gap between the rich and the poor, the income inequality gap? You see the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. That seems to be the case in Ivory Coast.
It is a very, very difficult question to answer with how. Once how comes in, it's that secondary question is a very difficult question to answer. But excuse me, let me try and see how I can address that. It is for the state actors of Cote d'Ivoire to realize and find out where this growth is coming from, and see how they can share the distribution of this, income equally. If the income of the economy is actually coming from one side, which is largely the private side, or what we call investment, economic investment from the private sector, then there's a high likelihood that, because of the objective of a firm is for profit making, and in that case, the private man would want to get his profit. Right? When you even apply the Pareto rule, you realize that, employees shouldn't get offended in this, but the employer is always taking about 80% of of the resources or the income that is coming into the firm, and then the 20% is actually shared among the employees. So in private sector management, that these things happened, and if the growth is driven by private sector, of course you see some of these things. On the other side, the state actors or the economic managers of Ivory Coast can also propel the growth from the fiscal management side, as in terms of government expenditure. And then in this case, I will advise that it should become a pro-poor policy where the poor will be targeted. And I think some of the African countries have done that, where they targeted the poor, and then they actually help the poor to come up. And one area that they can also look at is agriculture, because according to the World Bank Sustainable Development Goals, reducing poverty, I think the recent celebration of ending poverty, they actually linked it to agriculture. And in Africa, agriculture is one way that you can actually get the poor into the system, since they may not be able to do the colored job that we want them to do. So in that case, then they would get their income from agriculture. So the states will have to look at some of these things. I think Ghana is doing something in that regard that we can all look at. In terms, I think I was privileged to be part of the World Bank program on poverty reduction, and Ghana did a very good presentation with regards to the livelihood empowerment program. That's the against poverty program. That's the LEAP program. It's something that some of the African countries can emulate. In as much as I would also caution that it doesn't look like a vote buying scheme, or whereby we would actually be giving the money to political athletes and other people who are closer to us.
Interesting submissions being made there, but we'll straight be moving to the case of Kenya. Kenya has experienced in 2016 a GDP growth seen at 5.9%, which has been moved by agriculture and tourism. But let me take brief submission based on Kenya's growth shortly, just a brief one, because we move to a very interesting conversation in our next topic.
Yeah, so before I get into
Sure.
Kenya, I'd like to make the point about bridging the gap between the poor and the rich. The truth of the matter is that poverty is a cycle. You understand that. So when your father or your parents are poor, it is likely that you may end up being poor. It's not very likely, but it's likely, not highly likely. You understand? It's a very subjective statement I'm making.
Sure. It
is my opinion. It's not. So it's my opinion. Unless, of course, the person decides to work extra harder, or the person is presented with some opportunities, the person is likely to end up in living in poverty for the rest of their life. What makes the difference here is the ability to take advantage of opportunities. And where does that ability come from? The ability to be educated properly. You understand that? And so the truth of the matter is that investment that come into Ivory Coast, just like any other African countries, but the local folks are not being part of those investments simply because of the usual lack of skills. They tell you that the local folks don't have the skills to take part in those investments. They don't have the skills to build the plant, the thermal plant we're building within the oil and gas industry, for instance. We don't have the skills to build these kinds of infrastructure, you understand? So we have to import labor force to build those infrastructure, and even in the process of building those infrastructure projects, the local folks are not part of the process, and that is very worrying. So it means we have to look at our skills, our ability to take advantage of opportunities, so that we can bridge the poverty gap. The other thing we have to do is to look at our growth patterns. They have to be, our growth patterns have to be socially friendly. That's how I put it. If it is not socially friendly, we'll continue to suffer. You understand that? The large chunk of the growth, if you care to know, comes from agriculture and infrastructure. You understand, for Ivory Coast. And so how many poor people do you have in those two areas? What is their skills at all? Do they have skills to take part in those in the activities in those two sectors? You understand that? So if they don't have the skills, how do we blame growth for not giving them, or for not bringing them out of poverty? So it is important for us to question the fundamental root, which is the ability to take opportunities, based on education. Okay, you understand that. Now, I don't think that we also have to be looking at the agriculture, for the next 50 years. Sure. We have invested in agriculture for the past 100 years. The point is that we need to focus on you know, I was going to make a point, but I don't think we have time for that. In short, we need to connect agriculture to technology, to ICT. We haven't done that yet. We have to connect all other sectors to ICT. If we have to see some industrial revolution in Africa today, that will propel into some kinds of livelihood transformation, we need to focus on ICT. You understand that? Now, about Kenya. Kenya again, Kenya's economy is largely dependent on agriculture, livestock, and livestock farming, and tourism. But you and I know that the country has been faced with some serious security challenges, and that has actually, I mean, those challenges have affected the growth outlook of the country. Because when your country is not secure, people don't come to invest, people don't come to look at the things in their country, so they don't come for tourism purposes. So it is important that the actors in the country don't behave in a way that jeopardizes the security of the country, especially the political actors. Don't forget, there is some fragility within the political space in the country because there are some tensions between the ruling party and the opposition leader, Raila Odinga. And so, in fact, that was the main reason why there was a crisis in 2007 after the election. So this year, people are watching, terrorists are watching, investors are watching, and other interest groups are watching. When there's opportunity, the opportunity benefits some people, some actors. It could benefit the terrorists when there's crisis, so they can come in and do what they have to do. It could benefit, you know, investors when the country is stable. So I think we have to look at it from that perspective and say that, okay, if Kenya wants to continue to witness the growth that it's seeing, aided by agriculture, we have to invest in stability of the region, you know, because without stability, it is difficult for people to put their trust in you, their confidence in you.
Okay.
You understand that? I can't put my money where I'm not too sure what will happen to you tomorrow. You understand? Okay. So that's really the focus of my of my summation. I think so. But I don't think that we'll have to continue to rely on agriculture as the backbone of our economy. They tell you this all the time, but you don't have the workforce to transform the produce you get from agriculture to finished product and sell them to the market, both locally and internationally. When you produce those products, they come and take the product and transform them over there, bring them back to you to buy. You understand? And your people don't have money to buy quality products, so they bring the low standard product for you because people don't have the purchasing power to buy quality products. You understand? And all kinds of diseases in the system because you're eating low standard food or you're eating all kinds of foods. You understand? So I think it's some kind of I don't know how to put it, but it's very sad. It's a dilemma that we have to really study very well and understand.
I think we'll definitely have to have time to delve the whole day comprehensively on just on agriculture, tackle it from historical perspective to the contemporary moment, and see whether indeed it had to do with the paradigm shift in terms of mental understanding of how best we can approach agriculture in Africa. But let me get submission from Gideon on this Kenya's case.
I would want to get some time to talk about this whole poverty and then bridging the gap issue.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that.
It is important for us to state that, you know, depending on the angle you are seeing poverty from, and then depending on the platform with which we are discussing poverty, then we look at some of the technicalities of it. For instance, if I happen to be talking about poverty in church, I'm sure I'll bring the spiritual implication of poverty in here to let people know that poverty is actually a spirit, you know, and probably an evil spirit, and then we need to cast it out. Yeah, we need to cast it out. In the same way, if a psychologist, I mean, is actually a motivational speaker, is actually looking at poverty, then I'm sure he's going to look at it from emancipation from mental slavery, you know, thinking that poverty actually is it's a state of mind, and you need to get out from that state of mind. So depending on the angle you are looking at it from, you would look at the solution with which you would, you know, give to some of these concepts. And sometimes, as a traditional African, you know, man, you would tend to see poverty to be somehow, you know, inherited from your family. If your family is poor, actually there's a high tendency of you being poor. But if we're looking at it from the national perspective or the state perspective, where economics and then distribution of wealth comes in, or distribution of resources comes in, then we would actually be looking at talking to those who have the hand to move things. You know, I'm talking about the economic managers to channel the resources to the poor, in any case to help the poor come up. So depending on where we are looking at it from, so if we're looking at it from the state angle, which I think that's what we are doing here.
Yes.
So if that's what we are doing, then in this case we'll be looking at the various aspects of poverty, because poverty is actually not the income poverty alone, because health poverty comes in, educational poverty also comes in, and the other aspect of poverty that the state, we expect the state to tackle these areas, and the state will have to distribute the resources to these areas. Otherwise, if we begin to look at it from another angle, of the spiritual angle, where you ask somebody, in fact, you go for a survey and you ask somebody, are you poor? And then the person has to answer a question, and the person tells you, well, I believe in Jesus, so I am not poor. You know, but looking at the person's condition, you can tell from data that the person is poor. So if we're looking at it from the state perspective, and in this case, this aspect of poverty will have to be looked at, and then we entreat the state managers to actually distribute the resources in this regard. That's why we'll look at agriculture as a way that we have majority of our population. And this is not only Cote d'Ivoire or Kenya or even Rwanda. It actually cuts across the whole Africa, where majority of the labor force is in agriculture. Actually, if you look, if I have to discuss that from a certain perspective, I think the people must have to develop themselves in order to come up and move agriculture to the industrial area. But in as much as we haven't reached that stage yet, what are the people in charge doing in terms of distributing the resources? Get these people, because that is the only way we can get them, get closer to the haves, those who are below the poverty line, to get to the haves. Even when we even look at the poverty line, where UN is saying that every day, every citizen of this world is actually supposed to live on $1.9 a day. It used to be 1.25, but it's $1.9. As to whether that is even, sustainable in terms of if you have to convert it to your currency, local currency, as to whether that is also feasible is another thing we have to look at. But coming to agriculture in Kenya, I think I would agree with what my colleague was saying. Kenya, now that agriculture is pushing the economy, they don't need to rely so much on agriculture to push the economy. And at the same time, they need to get the gap bridged from agriculture to agro-processing to industry, whereby we link it to an international trade where we can also export, at least even if not the finished product, but the semi-finished product, so that we can be competitive on the international market.
A great point being made there. We always give you in-depth analysis of technical issues, economic issues, prompting and developing across many countries in Africa. Now we come back to Ghana. At the moment, the Association of Ghana Industry are suggesting, or let's say taking into consideration, an option which has to do with partnership, either in mergers or acquisition. They intend to do that in order to solidify the activities in the Ghanaian business market. But let me take a quote from the president of the AGI. He made a very interesting one. He said, "We are looking," and I quote, "we are looking at being able to even take advantage in terms of partnerships and strategic growth direction. So we think that we should try and focus our attention and try and help businesses to focus on other areas of capacity building." End of quote. So this is the comment being made by the president. And he also went ahead to say that we must work together as local businesses, such that it will not be small businesses doing their own thing. In the end, we don't have that needed impact. We don't have that needed impact, but when we would be able to come together in partnerships, in joint ventures, and create a bigger platform so that our impact will be felt. End of quote. So this is the Mr. Asare J, the president, who was making this interesting remark as to how best local businesses can best thrive in this challenging terrain of business environment. Isidor, what's your take on that?
Thank you very much, Winston. I have been one of the people who speak in favor of of business partnerships and acquisitions or mergers. Not acquisitions per se, but mergers. The reason being that when there is when there's some kind of merger or partnership, you increase the capacity of the businesses. You increase the financial capacity, you increase the workforce capacity, you understand, and you also increase or expand the business prospect of the businesses involved in that transaction. So I do see and I do align myself with the position of the president of the AGI, the Ghana Association of Ghana Industries. Now, it is important for us to understand these. There are many aspects of business partnerships or mergers. It is important for us to question whether there is a sufficient regulatory framework to oversee such transactions. It is very important to look at that. Two, it is also important for us to look at the interests of the businesses involved in the transaction, whether or not their interest, converge at some point, so they can really work smoothly. It is important for us to look at that too. I have been actually saying that businesses in Ghana shouldn't remain local. They cannot remain local forever. They have to go continental, even international. How do you do that? You cannot do that alone. You need some partnerships, either locally or internationally. In fact, I have talked about the fact that one of the reasons why governments prefer to borrow money on the international markets, many African governments, of course, is because of the inability of banks, to borrow to governments or to finance government huge appetite for money. You understand that if government has to borrow billions of the Ghana cedis, for instance, to finance some projects in the country, they won't come to banks in the country. Why? Because the banks don't have that liquidity to give to government. You understand that? So they have to go onto the international market to borrow money, and that adds up another pressure on our currency, that adds another pressure on our interest rates, and any other indicator that affects the business prospects of both government and private sector. So it is important. I do remember saying that it is important for us to encourage banks to also go into mergers and acquisitions, so they can even easily finance government projects. At the same time, have the capacity, large financial base to finance private sector projects and so on. But it is difficult to do that when you don't have a strong regulatory framework. You understand? If you have a regulatory framework like what we have in the microfinance industry, we will suffer if these kinds of the trends begin to take place. So I would stress on first the regulatory authority or framework to oversee such business partnerships and mergers, and then the business interest. It is important for us to look at these two, and then you look at the market conditions. When you measure, what then becomes of your market size? You understand? When you measure, it's simply because you want to maybe acquire new customer base, or you want to go into other areas, or you want to increase your market position. So how then does that become realistic after your partnership transaction?
All right.
And that is also key. So, but I really believe that it is very important for us to talk about business partnerships and mergers. I really believe that, and I believe that that's one way we can take our businesses to the continental and to a very large extent in international level.
Okay, it appears most businesses in the country are of the view that they can become local champions instead of continental dominance, and also expanding their frontiers across the African continent. But you made mention of regulatory framework. Do you think we have issues with that? On top of that, according to the ease of doing business report presented by World Bank, Ghana has at the moment increased in performance a bit. But what is your take on this?
Thank you very much once again. I think I side with the comment from the president of the AGI. What I'm trying to understand is his whole conceptualization of the word partnership, because I'm tempted to think that he's talking about huge corporation or companies or limited liability companies coming together, from different angles. But if that is not the case, and he is talking about maybe sole proprietorship, like I have my own business registered in my name as a sole proprietor, and then you also have your company, which is also a sole proprietor, and we have to come together to be partners. That one, we may have to look at it again because it's a bit dicey. As far as the regulatory frameworks are concerned, it might not favor the Ghanaian business so much because the disadvantage of going into business as a sole proprietor is unlimited liability. In the same way, so if you bring two unlimited liabilities together, I'm sure you know what will happen in case of any eventualities. I mean, something bad could happen if two partners. So I don't know the angle with which he's talking about partnership. If it's two different sole proprietors coming together to be partners, that's quite dangerous. But where we may have to go as a corporation or a limited liability company, you also have your limited liability companies which have to come together and merge for competitiveness sake. I mean, international, we compete internationally. That is good. I have a funny, reason why Ghanaians will not want to do businesses together. I am tempted to think that sometimes it comes from our schooling system, how we grew up from school, the way we write exams, I'm not encouraging cheating actually.
So you wanted us to partner in this?
No, I'm coming. Let me make the point. So, you'll be sitting in your classroom with in fact, it could be your own brother, but you're writing exams and you have to cover your work for the, so it gets to a point whereby in life, we're growing up and then I'm having successes, but the African man would not want to share with the other brother that this is what I'm doing, why I'm succeeding. He would want to go solo, and going solo, and we all know it will make you a local champion. So if we have to come together, that is very important. That's what I'm trying to talk about. We have to come together, but not as sole proprietors, but as corporations, and we have to come together. But in as much as we are talking about industries, we can't talk about industries without talking about, let's say, where the raw materials are coming from. If it's a food industry, then we have to be looking at agriculture again. Sorry to take us back to agriculture, but we need to help agriculture so that if somebody is going to food processing in terms of juice or whatever, then we can bridge the gap. At the moment, it looks like we're talking about youth in agriculture, and then we are still talking about it, but the youth are not getting into agriculture. I think we should ask why. I think there's a serious problem there. Why the youth are not getting into agriculture? Because nobody encourages the youth to be a banker. He finishes school and the person desires to be a banker.
No,
but
interestingly, you brought a very interesting question. Last week, the Unemployment Ministry, that is Haruna Idrisu, the Honorable Haruna Idrisu, he made mention of a very interesting remark that has to do with partnership with the AGI in order to give tax rebates to companies, especially the banks who intend to employ youth. So depending on the number of youth you employ, it's likely you get tax rebate. What is your comment on that?
Yeah. I mean, some of these things should also be channeled to the areas I was talking about. I mean, it's good that, you give so that we'll get more of the youth employed. But the point I was trying to make is, we have been trumpeting youth in agriculture, but the youth are not getting into agriculture. Why? There is something wrong somewhere. Why they are not getting there? This is also funny, but I think when we were growing up, when in school, when you do something wrong, the punishment that they give you is actually go to the field and weed. And, so sometimes you grow up and then weeding becomes something like a punishment. Just by the way. But I think there is a problem somewhere because we don't encourage the youth to apply to the bank, to apply to to get an office work, but we are encouraging them to go to agriculture. Why are they not going? There's something fundamentally wrong there, and I think we should look at it from that angle so that the youth can get into agriculture even as they get the raw material to feed the industries. Indeed. In as much as the monetary policies and the fiscal policies should be put in place to back that. Yeah.
Wow. That has been quite a lot of mouthful of conversation in terms of analysis being done right here this morning on the Trending Economic Issues segment. My guests have been Isidor Kpotufe, who is the Director of Communication with IMANI Ghana, is also an expert in IT technology across Africa. And one thing that I always admire about him is about his passion for development across Africa in terms of the case of integration of the African continent. When he's discussing that topic, I'm telling you, He brings out a lot. It sometimes baffles me. And to my immediate left, I have Gideon Amissah. He's an astute research professor, and also he goes much into details when it comes to bringing factors to play in terms of technical analysis on African issues. It's with the Institute of Certified Economists here in Ghana. Gentlemen, thank you so much for making time, and Africa really appreciate it.